The obsidian halls of Nixar Prime stretched endlessly into the darkness, their black walls carved from stone that had witnessed the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations across the galaxy. And tonight, those ancient halls were filled with the most powerful beings in all of known. Space Princess Seraphina Velkoth stood at the center of the grand chamber, her pale skin glowing faintly in the crimson light that bathed everything in shades of blood and shadow, and her eyes, red as dying stars, surveyed the gathered crowd with a mixture of boredom and contempt that she had perfected over her 3,000 years of existence. The Crimson Gala was the most important political event in a century, a gathering where princes from the 7 dominant species of the Galactic Concord would compete for her hand in marriage. And with that union would come an alliance with the Valkyrie Dominion, the most feared empire in all the stars. Her people were called vampires by the lesser species, a name given to them because of their pale skin, their crimson eyes, and their need to consume the life essence of other beings to survive. And while the name was crude and primitive, Seraphina had to admit it captured something true about her kind. They were predators, ancient and terrible, and every species in the galaxy knew it. The suitors had arrived in great splendor, each one bringing gifts and promises designed to impress her and win her favor. And Seraphina watched them with the patience of an immortal who had seen such displays countless times before Prince Zorath of the Kethari was the first to approach, his massive form towering over everyone in the chamber, and his 4 powerful arms were covered in the ritual scars of his warrior people, each mark representing a battle won and an enemy destroyed. He knelt before her with surprising grace for one so large and presented a crystalline box containing the preserved hearts of 12 enemy generals he had slain in single combat. "For you, princes," he rumbled, his voice like thunder rolling across distant mountains. "I offer the strength of the Kethari Empire and the promise that no enemy will ever threaten what is yours." Seraphina accepted the gift with a polite nod, though inside she felt nothing but cold indifference. For she had seen stronger warriors fall and mightier empires crumble to dust. Next came Prince Lyrian of the Sylvani. And where Zorath was all brutal power, Lyrian was ethereal beauty made flesh, with skin that shimmered like moonlight on water and eyes that held the depths of infinite knowledge. The Sylvani were telepaths, their minds connected across vast distances of space, and they were said to be the most intelligent species in the galaxy. Though Seraphina suspected they simply believed this because they had never met anyone who could prove them wrong. "I sense your loneliness, Princess," Lyrian whispered, his voice entering her mind like silk sliding across bare skin. "And I offer you a connection deeper than any physical bond, a joining of minds that will last for eternity." She pushed him out of her thoughts with a mental wall of ice and smiled politely while imagining what it would feel like to drain every drop of his glowing essence. Prince Vexolan of the crystalline hegemony came next, his body a living sculpture of precious gems that caught the light and scattered it into 1,000 rainbow fragments. And he carried with him the wealth of 100 mining worlds, enough treasure to buy entire star systems. "Name your price, Princess," he said, his voice chiming like bells, "and I shall pay it 10 times over, for there is nothing in this universe that cannot be purchased." "And I intend to purchase your heart." Seraphina wondered if he would still be so confident when she explained that Valkyrie did not sell themselves like common goods at a market. But she held her tongue and simply accepted his chest of rare gems with the same empty courtesy she had shown the others. The 4th prince was Drakmar of the Infernal Consortium, a creature of scales and fire whose very presence raised the temperature in the hall by several degrees. And his people were known throughout the galaxy as the most ruthless merchants and negotiators, willing to do anything to secure a profitable deal. "An alliance between our peoples would make us unstoppable," he hissed, smoke curling from his nostrils. "And together, We could bring the entire galaxy under our combined rule within a single century. His ambition was naked and obvious, and Serafina found it almost refreshing after the pretense of the others. Though she still felt nothing resembling attraction or interest, more princes came after that, each one more impressive than the last in their own way, offering military might and economic power and political connections that would make the Volcari Dominion even more dominant than it already was. And Serafina felt nothing for any of them. Her ancient blood, refined over thousands of years of selective breeding, gave her the ability to taste the emotions of those around her, to sense the true feelings that lay beneath their words and gestures. And every single prince radiated the same flavors: ambition dressed as devotion, greed disguised as generosity, and a hunger to possess her that had nothing to do with love. She was a prize to be won, a territory to be conquered, and not one of them saw her as anything more. The gala continued around her as she stood like a statue in the center of the room, accepting gifts and compliments with mechanical precision while her mind drifted to thoughts of the endless centuries stretching out before her, empty and meaningless. And then she saw him. He stood at the far edge of the hall, near the servants' entrance, where he clearly did not belong, wearing the simple uniform of the Terran diplomatic corps, and he was watching her with an expression she could not immediately identify a human. Of all things, at the Crimson Gala, humans were a young species, barely 1,000 years into their spacefaring age, and they were considered by most of the galaxy to be primitive and unimportant. A minor player in the great game of interstellar politics, they had been invited as a formality, a gesture of inclusion that meant nothing. And this human was clearly just a translator or aide assigned to their small delegation. Should have looked away when her crimson eyes met his. Should have bowed his head in submission like every other lesser being in her presence. But he did not, held her gaze with steady brown eyes that showed neither fear nor worship. And there was something in that look that made Serafina pause for the first time all evening. She reached out with her senses, trying to taste his emotions as she had tasted those of the princes. And what she found confused her. There was warmth there, simple and genuine, and curiosity without agenda. And beneath it all, a deep sadness that seemed to have settled into his very bones like an old friend who had stayed too long. He was nobody. This human, a creature with a lifespan measured in mere decades, possessing no fleet and no fortune and no power worth mentioning, and yet he was the first being all night who had made her feel anything at all. Serafina did not know his name yet, did not know his story, or why he carried such weight in his ordinary human heart. But she knew with sudden certainty that before this night was over, she would find out the Crimson Gala continued around her. Princes competing for attention and courtiers whispering plots in shadowed corners. But Princess Serafina Velkoth had already stopped paying attention to any of it. Her eyes remained fixed on the human at the edge of the room. And for the first time in centuries, she felt something that might have been the beginning of interest. Serafina moved through the crowd like a shadow, her pale form gliding past princes and diplomats who tried to catch her attention with desperate words and grand gestures. But she ignored them all as she made her way toward the edge of the great hall where the humans stood alone. Other guests parted before her without being asked, their instincts warning them that a predator was on the hunt. And soon she stood before the human with nothing between them but a few feet of ancient stone floor. He was shorter than most of the alien princes, his body compact and functional rather than impressive, and his face showed the lines of someone who had lived through difficult times. Despite his relatively young age by galactic standards, "You are staring at me," Serafina said, a voice carrying the cold beauty of winter winds across frozen plains. The human did not flinch or bow or apologize as she had expected, and instead he simply nodded with a small movement of his head. "I apologize if I caused offense." "Your Highness," he replied, his voice calm and steady. but I have never seen a Valkyrie princess before. And I found myself curious. Curious, she repeated, tasting the word and the emotion behind it. Not afraid? Should I be afraid? The question was so simple and so honest that Serafina found herself momentarily without an answer. For every other being she had ever met had known exactly why they should fear her kind. I could drain your life essence in seconds, she said, and leave nothing but an empty shell where you once stood. The human considered this for a moment, and then he shrugged with a gesture that seemed almost careless. I suppose you could, he agreed, but you have not done so yet. And I suspect you would have already if that was your intention. Serafina felt something stir in her chest. Something that might have been amusement or annoyance or perhaps a mixture of both. And she decided that this human was either very brave or very foolish. What is your name? She demanded. Marcus Cole, he answered, Lieutenant Commander in the Terran Diplomatic Corps, currently serving as a translator for our trade delegation. A translator, Serafina said. That explains why you are here, though not why you are standing alone in a corner staring at royalty instead of doing your job. Marcus glanced over his shoulder toward a small group of humans in formal attire who were attempting to make conversation with a disinterested crystalline. Merchant, my duties are finished for the evening, he explained, and I was told to remain until the delegation departed. So I found a quiet spot to wait, and you chose to spend that time watching me. You were the most interesting thing in the room. The words were spoken without flattery or seduction, just a simple statement of fact. And Serafina found herself reaching out with her senses once more to taste the truth of them. What? She found made her pause. There was no calculation in his emotions, no hidden agenda or desperate desire to use her for some purpose. And the interest he felt was genuine and untainted by the greed that she had tasted in every prince who had approached her throne, but beneath that interest, the sadness remained, deep and heavy like a stone that he carried everywhere he went. You have lost someone, Serafina said. And it was not a question. Marcus looked at her with surprise in his brown eyes. And for a moment she saw the walls around his heart tremble before he steadied himself. Is it that obvious? He asked quietly. I can taste your grief, she replied. It is woven into every thought and feeling you have, coloring everything with shades of sorrow. He was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again his voice was softer than before. My wife and daughter, he said. 3 years ago during the Harkin incursion, Serafina had heard of that conflict. A brutal war where the Harkin Empire had attempted to expand into human territory, and the young species had fought back with a ferocity that has surprised everyone in the galaxy. The Harkin glassed several human colonies, she recalled, killing millions. New Geneva was one of them, Marcus confirmed. That was where my family lived while I was deployed on the frontier. I am sorry. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and Serafina realized with some shock that she actually meant them, that she felt something resembling sympathy for this small human and his small human tragedy. Marcus seemed equally surprised by her response, and he looked at her with new curiosity in his eyes. That is kind of you to say. Your Highness, do not mistake my words for kindness, Serafina warned, though her voice lacked its usual edge. I am simply acknowledging a fact. Of course. They stood in silence for a moment, and Serafina found herself unwilling to return to the crowd of princes and schemers who awaited her attention, preferring instead to remain in this quiet corner with a human who expected nothing from her. Why did you not leave the military after your loss? She asked. Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. Because there was nowhere else to go, he said, and no one else to go there with. So I stayed and followed orders and let the work fill the empty spaces in my days. That sounds like a terrible way to live. It is not living, Marcus agreed. It is existing, but sometimes existing is all you can manage until something changes. And has anything changed? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something flicker in his eyes that she could not identify. Perhaps, he said softly. I am not sure yet. Serafina felt her cold heart stir once more, and she knew that she was treading on dangerous ground, that this human represented something she had not anticipated and could not easily control. You have nothing to offer me, she said suddenly, needing to remind herself of the reality of their situation. No fleet, no fortune, no political advantage of any kind. Marcus smiled for the first time, and the expression transformed his ordinary features into something almost handsome. I was not aware that I was offering anything, Your Highness, he replied. I am just a translator standing in a corner. You are infuriating. I've been told that before. Despite herself, Serafina felt laughter building in her chest, a sensation so foreign that she almost did not recognize it. And when the sound escaped her lips, it was light and genuine and completely unplanned. Several nearby guests turned to stare in shock at the sound of the Valkyrie princess laughing with a human nobody. And Serafina saw the alien princes across the hall watching with expressions of disbelief and growing anger. She did not care. Tell me more about yourself. Marcus Cole, she demanded. I wish to understand why you are so different from everyone else in this room. There is not much to tell, Marcus said. I am just a man who has seen too much and lost too much, and somehow keeps moving forward anyway. That is not nothing, Serafina replied. That is resilience, and it is rarer than you might think among the so-called superior species of this galaxy. They talked for hours after that, standing in their quiet corner while the gala swirled around them. And Serafina learned about Earth and humanity and the struggles of a young species trying to find their place among ancient stellar empires. Marcus spoke of human history, of wars and plagues and disasters that should have destroyed his people, but somehow only made them stronger. And he spoke of small kindnesses and simple joys, and the stubborn refusal to give up even when all hope seemed lost. And Serafina listened with an attention she had not given to anyone in centuries, finding herself drawn to this ordinary man with his extraordinary spirit. When the gala finally ended, and Marcus had to leave with his delegation, Serafina watched him go with an unfamiliar ache in her chest. The alien princes had noticed her attention, had seen her laughing and talking with the human for hours, and their jealousy burned like poison in the air around them. They would not let this insult stand, Serafina knew, and she could already see them plotting and scheming in their dark corners. But for the first time in millennia, Princess Serafina Velkoth found that she did not care about political consequences or diplomatic complications. She had tasted something rare and precious in that human, something that all the power and wealth in the galaxy could not buy, and she was not willing to let it slip away without a fight. The challenge came 3 days after the Crimson Gala, delivered by Prince Zurath himself to the small human diplomatic quarters with all the ceremony of a declaration of war. Marcus stood in the simple room he had been assigned, watching as the massive Kethari warrior entered with barely contained rage burning in his 4 eyes. Human, Zorath growled, the word dripping with contempt. You have insulted the honor of the 7 great houses by drawing the attention of Princess Serafina away from those worthy of her consideration. I did not draw anything, Marcus replied calmly. I simply had a conversation. You spoke with her for hours while princes of ancient lineage waited for her attention, Zora thundered. And your presence at her side made us all look like fools in front of the entire galactic concord. The other princes had gathered behind Zorath, their alien forms filling the doorway with menace and power. And Marcus could see that they had come to some kind of agreement despite their usual rivalries. We invoke the trials of blood, Prince Lyrian announced, his telepathic voice sliding into Marcus's mind. As is our right under ancient Velkari law when a suitor's honor has been questioned. I am not a suitor, Marcus pointed out. "You are now," Prince Vexolin chimed, his crystalline body catching the light, by entering the princess's attention. "You have declared yourself a competitor for her hand, and you must face the trials or forfeit your honor and bring shame upon your entire species." Marcus understood immediately what they were doing. Using ancient laws to force him into contests he could not possibly win. Contests designed for beings with superhuman abilities and centuries of training. He also understood that refusing would reflect badly not just on himself, but on all of humanity, confirming the galaxy's belief that humans were weak and unworthy of respect. "When did the trials begin?" he asked. The princes exchanged glances of satisfaction, clearly expecting him to beg for mercy or try to escape his fate. "Tomorrow at dawn," Drakmar hissed, smoke curling from his scaled lips. "Try to get some rest, little human. You will need it." They left laughing, already certain of their victory. And Marcus sat alone in his room and thought about what he had gotten himself into. He should have been afraid. Should have been planning ways to avoid the trials or minimize the damage to himself. But instead he found himself thinking about Seraphina and the way she had laughed with him. The way her crimson eyes had softened when she heard about his loss. She had seen something in him that no one else had seen in years. Had looked past his ordinary appearance and his insignificant rank and found something worth her attention, perhaps that was worth fighting for. Even if the fight was hopeless. The trials began the next morning in a vast arena carved from the same black stone as the rest of Nixar Prime. And thousands of spectators gathered to watch the alien princes humiliate the arrogant human who had dared to catch a princess's eye. Seraphina sat in the royal box beside her mother, the Valkyrie queen, her face an unreadable mask that revealed nothing of the turmoil. Marcus suspected she felt beneath her composed exterior. The first trial was called the Hunt, and the competitors were transported to a death world filled with predators that had evolved over millions of years to become perfect killing machines. Marcus found himself alone in a forest of black trees, his only equipment a simple knife and his wits. While the alien princes had been given the same sparse tools, he could hear the creatures moving in the darkness around him. Massive beasts with too many teeth and an endless hunger. And he knew that the other competitors would use their superior strength and abilities to slaughter everything in their path. But Marcus was human. And humans had survived on a world filled with predators far larger and stronger than themselves for hundreds of thousands of years before they ever reached for the stars. He did not hunt the creatures directly, instead spending hours constructing traps from vines and branches, digging pits covered with false ground, and setting fire lines that would drive prey toward his ambush points. When the trial ended 2 days later, Prince Zorath had killed 17 beasts with his bare hands, and the other princes had similar impressive totals. Marcus had killed 12, but he had done it without a single wound, using patience and cunning where the others had used brute force. The crowd murmured in surprise, for they had expected the human to die within the first hour, and instead he had survived and competed. Seraphina allowed herself a small smile that only Marcus could see. Second trial was called the Mind Labyrinth, a psychic construct designed to break the sanity of anyone who entered, filling their consciousness with their worst fears and most painful memories until they surrendered or went mad. Prince Lirin completed the labyrinth in 3 hours, his telepathic abilities allowing him to navigate the mental traps with relative ease. And the other princes finished in times ranging from 6 to 12 hours. Marcus entered the labyrinth and immediately found himself drowning in memories he had spent years trying to forget. He saw his wife Elena smiling at him on their wedding day, her dark hair catching the sunlight, and then he saw the same smile frozen on her face as the news reports showed. New Geneva burning. He saw his daughter Maya taking her first steps, her tiny hands reaching for him, and then he saw the empty chair at the table where she would never sit. Again the labyrinth threw every painful moment of his life at him, Every failure and loss and moment of despair, and it asked him to break, to give up, to let the darkness consume him. Marcus had already lived through the worst thing that could happen to a person, had already faced the complete destruction of everything he loved, and he had somehow kept going. The labyrinth showed him hell, but he had already been to hell and survived. He emerged after 18 hours, his body shaking and his mind raw with reopened wounds. But he emerged on his own 2 feet with his sanity intact. The crowd was silent, for none of them had expected the human to finish it all. And even the princes looked at him with something approaching unease. The third trial was called the Endurance, and it was the most brutal test of all, for it required the competitors to withstand the Valkyrie blood drain, the process by which Seraphine's people fed on the life essence of other beings, one by one. The princes sat in the ritual chair, while a Valkyrie elder placed his hands on their shoulders and began to drain their strength. And one by one they collapsed when the pain became too great to bear. Prince Zorath lasted 8 minutes before his massive body gave out. Prince Leering lasted 6 minutes before his telepathic screams filled the arena. The other princes lasted between 4 and 10 minutes, their superior physiologies giving them some resistance, but not enough to truly impress. Then it was Marcus's turn. He sat in the chair and felt the elder's cold hands on his shoulders. And then the draining began, and it was like nothing he had ever experienced before. Every cell in his body screamed in agony as his life force was pulled away drop by drop. And the pain was so intense that he could barely remember his own name, but he did not collapse. Minutes passed, and the crowd began to murmur, and still Marcus remained upright in the chair, his teeth clenched and his hands gripping the armrests until his knuckles turned white. 1 hour passed, and then 2, and still he endured. When they finally stopped the trial after 3 hours, Marcus was barely conscious, his body drained to the edge of death. But he had not surrendered. How? Prince Zorath demanded, his voice filled with disbelief. How did you last so long when warriors 10 times your strength failed in minutes? Marcus looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering to fear any more. I have already lost everything, he whispered through bloodied teeth. Pain is just a reminder that I am still alive in the royal box. Princess Seraphina Velkoth watched the broken human being carried from the arena, and she felt something in her ancient heart crack open like ice melting in spring. She had seen what the others could not see. Not weakness but resilience, not foolishness but courage. And she knew now what she had only suspected before. This human, this nobody from a minor species, was worth more than all the princes in the galaxy combined. The great hall of Nexar Prime was filled with tension so thick that even the air seemed to vibrate with it. And every eye in the vast chamber was fixed on the raised platform where Princess Seraphina Velkoth stood beside her mother. The queen. The trials had ended 3 days ago, and now the moment of decision had arrived. The moment when Seraphina would choose her consort from among the competitors who had proven their worth in blood and suffering. Marcus stood at the back of the gathered crowd, his body still weak from the endurance trial, and he watched the princes position themselves before the royal platform with all the confidence of beings who knew they deserved to win. Prince Zorath had taken the most kills in the hunt. Prince Lurien had completed the mine labyrinth in the fastest time. Prince Vexolan had offered to triple his already astronomical bride price by any reasonable measure. Any one of them was a better choice than a broken human translator who had barely survived the trials. Through sheer stubbornness, Marcus did not expect to be chosen, had never expected anything from his conversations with Seraphina, except perhaps a pleasant memory to carry through his remaining years. And he was content to watch from the shadows as she selected someone worthy of her station. The queen rose from her throne and addressed the assembled crowd with a voice that carried the weight of 10,000 years of rule. The trials of blood have been completed, she announced. And my daughter will now make her choice, binding herself and our dominion to whichever suitor she deems most worthy." She turned to Serafina with an expectant look, clearly assuming that her daughter would select one of the powerful princes who could strengthen their empire and secure their borders for centuries to come. Serafina stepped forward, her crimson gown flowing around her like liquid blood, and she surveyed the princes with the same cold indifference she had shown at the Crimson Gala. "I have watched each of you compete," she said, her voice ringing through the silent hall. "And I have seen displays of strength and speed and wealth that would impress any ruler in the galaxy." The princes straightened with pride, each one certain that she was about to call his name. "But I have also tasted your hearts," Serafina continued, "as is my right and my gift as a daughter of the Valkyrie bloodline. And I have found them wanting." Confusion rippled through the crowd, and the princes exchanged uncertain glances. "Each of you came to me with offerings of power and promises of alliance," Serafina said, "and each of you believed that these things would be enough to win my hand. But none of you thought to offer me the one thing I truly desired." "And what is that, daughter?" the queen asked. Her voice careful and controlled. Serafina turned and walked down from the platform, her steps carrying her past the row of princes who watched her with growing alarm. And she did not stop until she stood before Marcus Cole the human, looked at her with surprise in his brown eyes. And she saw him glance around as if checking to make sure she had not meant to approach someone else. "Him," Serafina said, her voice clear and certain. The hall erupted into chaos. Prince Zorth roared with fury, his forearms raised in rage, and Prince Larian's telepathic protests filled everyone's minds with his disbelief, while Prince Vexolan's crystalline body flashed with angry light, and Prince Drachmar's flames burst from his scales. "This is an outrage," Zorth bellowed. "A human cannot be chosen over the princes of the great houses. This violates every tradition of the Concord." Larian added, his mental voice sharp with indignation. The queen raised her hand for silence, and such was her power that even the enraged princes obeyed. "Daughter," she said carefully, "explain yourself." Serafina turned to face her mother and the assembled crowd, her hand resting on Marcus's shoulder as he stood frozen with shock beside her. "For 10,000 years I have lived," Serafina declared, "and in that time I have tasted the essence of beings from every corner of the galaxy, from the highest kings to the lowest servants, and I have learned to recognize the true nature that lies beneath their words and gestures." She gestured toward the princes with contempt. "Every one of these suitors came to me wanting something, power or status or military advantage, and not one of them saw me as anything more than a prize to be won, a territory to be conquered and added to their collection of achievements." Her crimson eyes swept across the crowd, daring anyone to challenge her. "This human wants nothing from me," she continued. "He expects nothing. He came to this gala as a translator and found himself forced into trials he could not possibly win. And yet he faced them without complaint because he would not let his people be shamed." She looked down at Marcus, and her voice softened. "He has no fleet to offer, no fortune to share, no political advantage of any kind. And that is precisely why he is worthy, because he offered me the only thing of true value in a universe of schemers and liars." "And what is that?" the queen asked. "Authenticity," Serafina answered. "Simple, honest, human authenticity. The rarest treasure in all the stars." The hall was silent, every being present struggling to process what they were witnessing. And Marcus finally found his voice. "Serafina," he said quietly, "I am nobody, a broken man from a minor species, and you are a princess of the most powerful empire in the galaxy." "Yes," she agreed. "This will cause political chaos," he continued. "The princes will unite against your people, and there may be war." "Yes," she said again. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Serafina knelt before him, a princess, lowering herself before a commoner. And she took his hands in her own cold fingers. "I have lived for 10,000 years," she said. "And I have been cold and empty and alone for most of them, surrounded by beings who saw only my power and my bloodline. And you are the first person in millennia who has made me feel anything at all." She lifted her wrist to her lips and bit down, drawing her own royal blood, the sacred essence of the Valkyrie ruling line. "I choose you, Marcus Cole of Earth," she declared, letting her blood drip onto his hands in the ancient bonding ritual. "And let the stars tremble at my decision." The queen watched in silence as her daughter completed the ritual, binding herself to a human in a union that would reshape the political landscape of the entire galaxy. "It is done," the queen finally said, her voice heavy with the weight of consequences yet to come. "My daughter has made her choice, and the Valkyrie Dominion will honor it." Prince Zora stepped forward, his rage barely contained. "The great houses will not accept this insult," he growled. "You have chosen a creature with a lifespan of decades over princes, who would rule for millennia. Then the great houses are welcome to challenge the Valkyrie Dominion," the queen replied coldly. "And they will learn, as others have learned before them, why we are feared throughout the galaxy." The princes withdrew with promises of retribution and alliance breaking and war, their wounded pride driving them toward actions that would reshape the balance of power across known space. But in the center of the Great Hall, surrounded by chaos and fury, Serafina Velkoth helped Marcus Cole to his feet and looked into his ordinary human eyes with something that might have been the beginning of love. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, ready to be hated by princes and targeted by assassins and thrust into a political storm that will last for decades. Marcus looked at her, this ancient vampire princess who had chosen him over all the power in the galaxy, and he felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt since the day he lost his family hope. "I have been dead inside for 3 years," he said quietly. "And you just gave me a reason to live again, so yes, I am ready for whatever comes next." Serafina smiled, and it was a genuine smile that transformed her cold beauty into something warm and almost human. "Then let us face it together, my consort." And as the great hall emptied of angry princes and shocked diplomats, Marcus Cole realized that his life had just become far more complicated and far more meaningful than he had ever imagined possible. 6 months had passed since the choosing ceremony, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The spurned princes had done exactly what everyone expected, forming a coalition of wounded pride and shared hatred called the Alliance of Seven, and they had declared their intention to punish both the Valkyrie Dominion and humanity for the insult they had suffered. War seemed inevitable, and the diplomatic channels burned with threats and ultimatums as the great powers prepared for a conflict that would reshape the balance of power across known space. But they had made a critical mistake. These ancient princes, with their millennia of experience and their vast resources, for they had underestimated humanity. Marcus stood on the bridge of the Terran flagship Resolution, watching as the combined human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, hundreds of warships appearing in the darkness like stars being born. Admiral Chun sends her compliments. Prince Consort, the communications officer, reported, and requests permission to begin Operation Unity. Marcus still felt strange hearing his new title, still felt like the broken translator who had stumbled into a princess's attention by accident. But he had learned quickly that his role was more than ceremonial. He was a symbol now, a bridge between humanity and the Valkyrie. And he took that responsibility seriously. "Permission granted," he replied. "And tell the Admiral that humanity stands ready." The human response to the Alliance of Seven had surprised everyone, including Marcus himself. Within weeks of the coalition's formation, The Terran government had announced a full military alliance with the Volcari Dominion, pledging ships and soldiers and resources to defend their new partners against aggression. The galaxy had laughed at first, for humanity was supposed to be a minor species with primitive technology and no real power. But the laughter had stopped when the Terran fleets began to mobilize it. Turned out that humans had been quietly building their military capabilities for decades, learning from every species they encountered and adapting their technology to human needs. And the fleet that emerged was far more formidable than anyone had expected. Human engineers had reverse-engineered Valkyrie shield technology and combined it with Terran weapon systems to create ships that were fast, deadly, and almost impossible to destroy. Human soldiers, trained in the brutal calculus of survival against superior foes, had developed tactics that exploited the weaknesses of species who had grown complacent in their superiority and human determination. That stubborn refusal to surrender that had carried them through the Harkin incursion and 1,000 other challenges burned brighter than ever now that they had something worth fighting for. The first battle of the war took place in the Nexus system, where the Alliance of Seven had gathered a fleet of 3,000 ships to crush the upstart. Humans and their vampire allies, the Terran Valkyrie combined fleet, numbered barely 1,000 vessels. And the Alliance commanders were certain of victory. They were wrong. Marcus watched from the Resolution as human pilots flew circles around the ponderous Kethari warships, their fighters too small and too fast to target. And he saw Valkyrie boarding parties teleport onto Alliance vessels and tear through their crews with ancient fury. The battle lasted 18 hours, and when it ended, the Alliance had lost 2/3 of their fleet, while the combined forces had lost less than 100 ships. Prince Zerath himself was captured when his flagship was disabled and boarded, his forearms bound with unbreakable Valkyrie restraints as human marines escorted him to a prison cell. Galaxy watched in stunned silence as the impossible happened. As a coalition of the most powerful species in known space was defeated by vampires and humans, fighting together, more battles followed over the next months, and each one ended the same way, with Alliance defeats and human Valkyrie victories, until finally the remaining princes sued for peace. The treaty negotiations took place on neutral ground, and Marcus sat beside Seraphina as the terms were discussed, his presence a constant reminder of the choice that had started this war. "You have humiliated us," Prince Illyrian said, his telepathic voice bitter with defeat. "A human and a vampire princess have brought the great houses to their knees. You humiliated yourselves," Seraphina replied coldly, "by assuming that ancient power entitled you to victory, and by underestimating an opponent simply because they were young. Humanity will not forget this lesson," Marcus added quietly, "and we will not forgive those who threatened our allies." The treaty that emerged was favorable to the human Valkyrie alliance, establishing trade agreements and territorial boundaries that recognized humanity's new status as a major power in galactic politics. But more importantly, it sent a message that echoed through every corner of known space. Humanity had arrived, and they were not to be dismissed as insignificant. 1 year after the choosing ceremony, Marcus stood on the balcony of the Obsidian Palace, watching as Terran and Valkyrie ships patrolled the stars together, their running lights blinking in the darkness like distant fireflies. Seraphina joined him, her cold hand finding his warm one in the darkness, and they stood together in comfortable silence, as they had learned to do over months of partnership. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not come to that gala?" she asked. Marcus considered the question, remembering the broken man he had been, existing without living, moving through days without feeling them. "I think I would have continued existing until I stopped," he admitted, "going through the motions until my body gave out or my mind finally surrendered to the grief. And now?" He looked at her, this ancient princess who had chosen him over all the power in the galaxy, and he felt the hope that had been growing in his chest since the day she knelt before him. "Now I have something to live for again," he said. "Not just survival, but actual life, with meaning and purpose and someone to share it with." Seraphina smiled, and in the dim light her crimson eyes seemed almost warm. "I have lived for 10,000 years, she said, and I thought I had seen everything the galaxy had to offer, every joy and every sorrow, every triumph and every defeat." She squeezed his hand gently. "But I had never seen humanity before," she continued. "Never understood what it meant to be a species that turns loss into strength and grief into determination. And you have taught me things about resilience and hope that I never knew I needed to learn. We are a stubborn species." Marcus agreed with a small smile. "Too foolish to know when we are supposed to give up." "That is not foolishness," Seraphina replied. "That is the greatest wisdom of all." They stood together on the balcony as the night deepened around them. Two beings from vastly different worlds who had found in each other something neither had expected below them. The combined society of humans and Valkyrie was already changing, each species learning from the other and creating something new. In the process, human doctors were studying Valkyrie biology, searching for ways to extend human lifespans, while Valkyrie philosophers were exploring human concepts of love and family that seemed strange and wonderful to a species that had forgotten such things long ago. It was not a perfect union, and there were conflicts and misunderstandings, as there always were when different cultures came together. But it was a beginning. "Do you regret it?" Seraphina asked suddenly, "Being dragged into all of this, becoming a prince consort and a symbol and a target for every enemy we have made." Marcus looked at her, and then at the ships patrolling the sky, and then at the lights of the palace below where human and Valkyrie worked side by side. He thought about his wife and daughter, lost forever in the flames of New Geneva, and he knew that he would carry that grief with him until the day he died. But he also knew that they would not have wanted him to spend the rest of his life in darkness. Would have wanted him to find meaning and purpose, and perhaps even love again. "I was dead inside when I came here," he said quietly, "and you gave me a reason to live, so regret is not the word I would use." He turned to face her fully, taking both of her cold hands in his warm ones. "I would call it a beginning," he said, "the start of something new. For both of us and for all the people watching us." Seraphina leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a gesture she had learned from human customs and found surprisingly pleasant. And when she pulled back, there were tears glistening in her crimson eyes. "Then let us begin together, my human," she whispered, and as the stars wheeled overhead and the ships patrolled their endless routes, Marcus Cole, once a broken translator from a minor species, held his vampire princes and looked forward to whatever the future might bring, for he had learned the lesson that humanity had always known, the lesson that they were now teaching to the entire galaxy, that it did not matter how many times you fell, or how badly you were broken, or how hopeless your situation seemed. What mattered was that you kept getting up, kept moving forward, kept hoping for something better, because in the end, the universe belonged not to the strongest or the fastest or the most ancient. It belonged to those who refused to give up, and humanity, as they had proven time and time again across the long centuries of their existence, never gave up on anything worth fighting for.